This is part 3, chapter 3 of What If the Kamado Siblings Parted Ways. Link in description. Hope you all enjoy the video, and if you do, then like, comment, and subscribe for more. Let's start. Branching Paths by Skyward Strike. Chapter 3, The Hand Demon. Elsewhere in Fujikasane, Satoshi Uteki sidestepped past the lunge of a demon. He had managed to hide and avoid confronting demons directly for a long time, but a couple hours into the final selection, he was finally caught off guard and forced into a fight. Despite nervous at finally being forced to face his worst fear head-on, he was at least glad for the fox mask covering his face and hiding all that uncertainty. "Get back here, you mask bastard," it cackled manically, moving at him again. "I'm gonna tear you up." Raising his Nichiren blade before him, Satoshi took a deep breath. "Come on now, you can do this." He rushed forward to meet the demon's dash. Breath of water, first step. Water surface slash. His blade seemed to be enveloped with a thin stream of water as it was swung, then decapitating the demon with a single powerful slash before it ever had the chance to reach Satoshi. Both the demon and its head hit the ground. "Damn it. You shitty demon slayers and your shitty swords. It might not be by me, but you'll get ripped apart by some other demon, bastard, I know it." The demon would continue shouting obscenities as it faded away, with Satoshi only standing there watching it from behind the mask. Once it was really dead, he'd move the mask to the side of his face to reveal an expression of surprise. "Wow, I did it," he said, still processing the fact that he had actually managed to bring down a demon like that, all with a single blow. What had seemed to be his greatest fear after the traumatic experience for so many years, taken down, just like that. I think I can do this, Dad," he said, gripping his katana tightly, as he looked at its blade, watching his own reflection and the determination in the image of his eyes. "I can become a powerful demon slayer too." Unfortunately, it wasn't quite that simple, and he'd find that out fairly quickly as his moment of pride was broken by the sound of something crashing behind him. Satoshi would turn around to see another boy, having apparently crashed onto the side of a tree. It took a moment, but he would recognize the boy in spite of the numerous wounds he donned as the very same kid with a buzzcut that had nearly picked a fight with Tanjiro Kamado. He groaned, struggling to get back up and panting heavily as blood poured from a wound in his head and down his face. His whole body was shaking as he raised his katana in front of him before noticing Satoshi there and locking eyes with him, making it clear to see the sheer terror in his face. Even if he knew he couldn't run away. The boy muttered a single word. "Run." That was all he could get out before a massive arm shot out from behind the trees, stretching across the clearing and towards him at great speeds. The boy tried to raise his sword and stab through the hand, and though he managed to do so, it didn't prevent it from still reaching his head and crushing it against the tree trunk into a gory mess. Snapping the katana stabbed through it in the process. Satoshi froze at witnessing such a gruesome death, and turned his gaze to where the massive arm had come from, which was when he saw it. Sprouting from the trees was a hulking mass of flesh, its skin green and its massive body enveloped in grotesque veins, with numerous arms sprouting from all over its body, including most of its face with the exception of its eyes and nose. It had its extended arm grab onto the buzzcut boy's leg and drag it back to him, before opening a gaping maw hidden between its numerous arms and swallowed the boy whole. The sound of it crunching the body to bits clear to hear even from where Satoshi was standing. What the hell is this thing?" he asked himself, unable to do anything other than tremble in the face of such a massive monster. Is it really a demon? I thought demons were supposed to be people that were turned. That thing, there's no way that thing was once a human. It then seemed to notice Satoshi's presence, and turned its large crossed pupils in his direction, before its eyes narrowed in what seemed to be amusement at something. Well, now," it said in a raspy voice, "it seems another one of you cute little foxes have wandered into my territory." Foxes? Satoshi thought in slight confusion before realizing, is he referring to the warding mask? Despite his overwhelming fear, he found it in himself to enter a stance holding his sword before him. "What do you mean by that? You must be another student of Urokotaki's, aren't you? I can tell by the mask." The hand demon said gleefully, pointing some of its many index fingers at him. That bastard imprisoned me here many years ago. I've taken upon myself to devour every student of his that I come across since. It then paused for a moment, seeming to count on its many fingers. You would be the 13th. No, 14th one you brought that I've eaten since I got here. 14. I thought the demons here were supposed to be weak. How did this one manage to stay alive and get so big? Satoshi thought before shaking his head. It doesn't matter how big or strong he is. I'm a demon slayer, and bringing down strong demons is what great demon slayers do. Actually, this mask was my father's. Satoshi said, anger and conviction overriding his initial fear of the demon and allowing him to speak up. He was Yorokotaki's student. Not me. Not, but it doesn't matter. You've killed so many people. I can't let you go on living. Your father's, huh? The demon noted, scratching its head with some of its many hands while outright ignoring Satoshi's claim to kill it. I guess it doesn't matter. I might have missed your dad, but I'll just make up for it by eating you. It cackled then, extending its arms towards the boy. Okay. It's big, but that just means he isn't as fast in moving around. I gotta dodge his arms, close the distance and slice his neck off. Satoshi held his sword before him, his mind set on facing the demon, and yet his trembling flesh refused to fully comply. But first, you gotta move, so cut this out. Don't think, just move, move. Deeply breathing, he gripped his katana tighter to overcome his trembling and widening his eyes before finally moving, managing to dodge the incoming hand. Spinning around and swinging his blade to cut through the arm. Then he repeated the process by ducking underneath another arm and lopping it off with an upward swing. He repeated the process a couple times. Dodge the arm, then attack and slice it off. First dodge, then attack, dodge, attack. That is, until he tried to dodge and was met with a second arm having hidden its attack behind the first. Though Satoshi tried to move, he was clipped by the blow and sent sprawling about. How pathetic. The hand demon laughed. You said you were gonna kill me, but you can't even defend yourself. I shoulda known you weren't a disciple of Yurokotaki from the start. That old man wouldn't waste his time training such a weakling. It's right. Satoshi groaned as he rose with difficulty, blood dripping down his forehead and the mask on the side of his head cracked after he bounced his head off the ground during landing. Dodging and cutting those arms isn't enough. I gotta get in close, and cut off its head, even if that neck seems tough. He shook his head. No. You can't focus on that now. No ifs. No buts. I just have to give it my all and do it. The boy grit his teeth, breathing in deeply as he gripped his blade. Breath of water, fourth style, he called out. Fighting past the pain and summoning forth a stream of water to envelop his blade's edge before he once again dashed at the demon. Striking tide. You wanna go again. You're persistent, I'll give you that. The demon bellowed at him before sprouting more of its arms towards Satoshi. He moved like water however, weaving between them with newfound fluidity and precision in his movements. Cutting through the arms without a moment's hesitation and all the while causing the water around his blade to grow more and more into a powerful stream. Despite that, he was working to the best of his abilities at the moment. Pushing his breathing technique to its very limits in spite of the fact that doing so made his lungs feel as if they were about to burst. It doesn't matter, Satoshi told himself as he slashed another arm off after moving past it. The pain doesn't matter. Your limits don't matter. You gotta keep pushing, gotta keep going, build up momentum. That's the only way you'll be able to cut its head off. Having closed over halfway the initial distance between himself and the hand demon, Satoshi would leap over an arm from below before slashing it off. Followed by rolling upon landing to dodge another arm from above, which he cut off with a swing the moment he rose again. This is it, I can do it, he told himself, gripping his hilt tightly with both hands as he finally began approaching the demon while yet another hand was shot out at him. He brought down his blade to chop it off, as he'd done several times already, only for the arm to suddenly curve in an unexpected way, causing his blade to miss its mark and instead only produce a gash on the massive appendage's wrist. Satoshi cursed, but was unable to leap away in time as the hand took a hold of his left leg, and suddenly he felt himself being yanked over the demon's head by the flexible limb. the powerful stream on his blade fading as his concentration was disrupted. He was swung by the demon across the air with little reference for where he was heading until he impacted a tree trunk chest first, bouncing off it and hitting the ground hard. He coughed out blood, an intense pain suddenly coming over his chest as he realized the impact had broken a couple ribs. Satoshi tried to fight past it and rise again, but quickly collapsed as he realized it wasn't only his ribs that were broken, but his left leg as well. He looked down in pain and frustration, his warding mask breaking apart completely and falling into pieces on the ground before him. Shit. This is bad. I can't fight. Is this really it? He grunted, clenching his fists. I thought I could be a demon slayer. But there's no way anyone could kill that thing. It's just gonna keep eating more and more people. This is all hopeless. The hand demon meanwhile was laughing at the boy's despaired situation. Oh, there he is, breaking down. I always love this part the most. The moment when they realize they're gonna die, it's just the best feeling. It watched as slowly he would get on one knee and sheath away the katana he had managed to hold onto in spite of being thrown around so violently, returning it to its scabbard. Would you look at that? He really lost all fighting spirit on him. That's right, brat. It's useless to resist. Nothing's gonna stop me from eating you up just like all the others. Something happened though that the demon didn't expect, and that was Satoshi untying his katana, and using it as a cane to force himself back up on his feet with significant struggle. He managed to get into a proper stance in spite of his busted leg, and held onto his scabbard with one hand, while wrapping the other one around its hilt, ready to draw the blade at a moment's notice. He took a deep breath, powering through the intense pain in his broken ribs. I don't care if you're gonna kill me. I'm gonna fight you all the way down. I'll cut as many hands as I can before you pull me apart. I'm not dying to a piece of shit like you without any resistance. The demon was surprised by this, widening its eyes momentarily. Well, I was wrong. It chuckled cruelly. You know, you might not be as fast as the pink-haired brat with the flowered kimono, nor as strong as the peach-haired brat with the scar by his mouth, but you're still the most stubborn one I've eaten so far. It laughed then, many of its arms sprouting out and morphing together into a mass of flesh. You're not gonna cut a single hand of mine anymore. You cocky little shit. An even larger arm then sprouted from the mass of flesh, extending rapidly towards Satoshi once again. Satoshi grit his teeth, already knowing there was no way he wasn't going to be able to cut through an arm that big off in his current state, but that didn't mean he wasn't gonna try. I'm sorry, Dad, he thought as he began to draw his blade as the arm approached him, only for something to catch his eye. Something glistening against the little moonlight present in the forest directly above the demon. Before he knew it, it came crashing down directly on its head, revealing itself to have been a woodcutter's axe, now sunken fairly deeply into the demon's temple. This caused a moment of shock that led to the demon hesitating for an instant just as the hand was right upon him, and ended up saving Satoshi's life when he felt something tug at his haori and drag him out of the massive appendage's path in a moment's notice. So close that he could see the darkness around the palm enveloping before him a moment before he was dragged away from it through the space between its thumb and index fingers as it closed into a fist with enough strength to easily crush his head, just as he'd seen it done to the other demon slayer prospect earlier. Dragged out of the attack's way, Satoshi found himself skidding back first across the ground, stopping near a tree with the katana he'd failed to draw still in hand. He groaned, pushing himself to rest his back against it and maybe get an idea of what had happened. What he saw was not something he expected. Standing only a few feet ahead of, with his back turned to him, was the same crimson haori-clad boy with the Hanafuda earrings as he'd seen right before the start of the selection. Tanjiro. Kamado. He remembered, quickly realizing it had been him who'd thrown the axe in the first place, as well as tugged him away from the hand demon's grasp at the last moment. It was, in fact, something said demon was quite annoyed about as it simultaneously retracted the large hand it had created and used one of the arms around its neck to pull the axe off its head before crushing its shaft entirely under its grip and dropping its useless remains down to the ground. Oh, a newcomer. You should know better than to mess with my food, brat, especially one of my foxes. I take special pride in eating those fools. Tanjiro meanwhile only seemed to watch the demon curiously. A demon as big as you shouldn't exist in a place like this. How many of these would-be demon slayers did you feed upon? The hand demon's annoyance faded, as it seemed amused by the question. Oh, do you want to know? It's been so long, I lost count of it, but I've devoured at least 50 of you brats since I was put here decades ago. Satoshi grunted angrily, glaring daggers at the demon upon being told those 14 students were only a fraction of the people this monster had devoured. Tanjiro though only closed his eyes. It really doesn't change things at all, but at the very least it's nice to know how many souls I'll be avenging when I put you out of your misery. Hearing that, the injured Satoshi blinked in surprise. Wait, you can't mean you wanna fight the thing? It just broke your only weapon, he told the other boy, trying to stand up, only to fall back down clenching his chest painfully. Listen, you gotta run away. With my injuries, I'm a goner either way, but I can't let you kill yourself against that thing. It's interested in eating me, so I'll provide a distraction so you can escape for it. Tanjiro looked over his shoulder at the injured boy then, narrowing his eyes before turning fully and beginning to walk towards him. That's not going to happen. You are obviously too injured to even stand up, let alone fight. He then stopped, standing over Satoshi. From where we stand, there are now two possible futures depending on your choice. Either we are both killed and eaten just like so many before us, and then he extended his hand to Satoshi, or you can give me your sword. And I promise you that this demon won't ever hurt another person again. The hand demon narrowed its eyes hearing that. I'm tired of you brats talking loud like you're actual demon slayers. It grunted. Before three arms began extending together at high speeds towards Tanjiro, aiming to rip the boy to shreds before he could ever turn around and realize what was about to happen. Satoshi noticed what was happening behind him and widened his eyes, again trying to stand up, but again failing. You idiot, we're both dead now. He sighed, and looked up at Tanjiro. Only to meet his eyes for the first time, and to see something he hadn't before. Rage, filtered through a mask of composure, but clear to see in his eyes. Despite being more expressive than this boy, he understood it far too well. So many people had their lives taken by that abomination of nature, it didn't deserve to exist. He had fought until he couldn't stand, and despite not knowing this crimson-clad boy, something in him told Satoshi he'd do the same. Fine, he finally consented, raising his scabbard and the katana sheathed in it and thrusting it towards Tanjiro. Make it pay then. Tanjiro narrowed his eyes, but lowered his head, and reached for the blade, taking a hold of the hilt just as the three hands enclosed upon him from above. Thank you, he said, and a second later. The three hands would be heard dully hitting the ground as Tanjiro held the unsheathed blade to his side. I will. Satoshi widened his eyes, having been in perfect position to see everything that had just happened. In less than a moment, Tanjiro had drawn the katana from its scabbard, swung it over his lowered head with perfect timing to sever all three hands enclosing upon him at the wrist. Then completing the rotating motion by swinging it horizontally until his hand was stretched to the side holding the blade horizontally. Scratching a thin line at the bark of the tree, Satoshi stood at less than half a foot over his head. What? How did he see that coming? And not only that, he drew the sword so fast and managed to follow up with such perfectly accuracy. This guy knew exactly where he was aiming for. Satoshi stared at him in shock. Finally realizing that maybe Tanjiro's words, far-fetched as they might have seemed, were not so empty after all. It's decided then, Tanjiro said, turning around to face the demon, pointing his newly acquired white Nichiren blade at the demon before him. I'll be taking your head tonight. The hand demon was surprised too, widening its eyes at having three of its limbs cut all at once. You're fast. It narrowed its eyes then. But it doesn't matter. You're just another talented brat over your head. I've met many since I got here, and they all ended up eaten just the same. A dozen arms sprouted from its fleshy body, one by one shooting out towards their new target. Tanjiro never rushed, walking to meet their advance with a calm stride, breathing in deeply as hot air filled his lungs. He raised his blade, and as the first arm approached, he swung again for the wrist, easily slashing it off with a one-handed grip. The next 11 that followed were no different. Even when they came one after another in quick succession, Tanjiro only made the barest of movements to avoid their deadly grips, and then he slashed them off indiscriminately. Satoshi on one hand was awed with the ease the boy was dealing with the hand demon's assault. He'd pushed himself to his limits using the breath of water, and even then he was unable to get past those hands. And yet, here Tanjiro was, literally strolling past these attacks while casually cutting them down. The demon on the other hand was quite unnerved by that display, and that was clear to see in the widened surprise in its eyes. "You know," Tanjiro then said, as he lowered his blade, still walking towards it even when leaving behind a trail of dismembered hands melting away into piles of flesh. "You seem to pride yourself a lot in the amount of humans you've eaten, but I've been thinking, people only come up this mountain once a year for the final selection. Meaning that compared to the demons out there, you have a lot less chance to feed yourself with one of us." The hand demon narrowed its eyes then. "What are you insinuating, you brat?" "I think you know." Tanjiro donned a small yet knowing smirk in his face. "You're just the biggest fish in a small pond, aren't you?" The idea of this being what counted for a big fish on a small pond unnerved Satoshi, but this seemed to actually anger the monster. "How dare you? I'm gonna tear you up to pieces and make you watch as I eat you, you insolent little shit." Just as it said that, the ground underneath Tanjiro would shake, but he would leap into the air a moment before three hands burst from under the ground to try and grab him. The middle one shot up after him, trying to take a hold of the boy, but as it closed in to grab onto one of his legs and entrap him, Tanjiro would raise his leg to escape its grip before landing atop the now closed foot, giving him footing to swing his katana and cut off the two other arms as they rose to catch up with the first one before using the middle fist as a trampoline as it quickly opened again. At which point Tanjiro moved onto the fingers and used their motion to leap high into the sky, descending directly towards the hand demon. Said monster glared onto the boy. "Got you now, you arrogant brat," it cried out as several of its arms morphed together once again, this time shooting out his hand big enough to easily take a hold of Tanjiro and break his spine with a single squeeze. Satoshi watched nervously as the crimson-clad boy wielding his sword found himself in an impossible situation, seemingly unable to dodge the attack mid-air and avoid being crushed. Only he remained as calm as ever, and as the massive hand approached, ready to grab him, he only swung his sword, severing 4 of its fingers in a moment, from index all the way to the pinky, before grabbing onto the side of the thumb and using it to pull himself up and land in the back of the large palm, followed by dashing down the length of the massive arm and towards the hand demon's head. This seemed to really make the demon panic as he now saw a demon slayer finally closing distance on it once again, and sprouted several more hands along the length of its massive fused arm in an attempt to halt Tanjiro, but proved completely unsuccessful as every single rising arm was easily cut down by the young swordsman without barely slowing him down. Finally, he leapt, closing the distance between himself and the demon's head all the way. Satoshi held his breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. Tanjiro had managed to do everything he'd failed in doing, but was yet to overcome the biggest hurdle of cutting through the beast's fortified neck. Should he fail, he clearly saw the numerous arms already rising to intercept him, and knew his savior would be killed just like everyone before him, and then Satoshi himself would follow after him. It was now or never. With a deep breath, Tanjiro grabbed a hold of his katana with his second hand, for the first time since he'd taken it in, while still mid-air, slashed right through the numerous arms protecting its neck without a moment's hesitation, finally decapitating the hand demon. You cut through my neck," the demon said in shock. The numerous hands that had been closing in around Tanjiro quickly fading into a fleshy viscous substance as both the head and the one who divorced it from its body landed with varying levels of smoothness. "That's impossible. You should be dead." Satoshi widened his eyes in disbelief. The monster he'd moments ago had deemed unbeatable being decapitated before his eyes, and without even laying a finger on its attacker nonetheless. With all his training, all his dedication, he'd never stood a chance. Couldn't even get close to cutting its neck. But this boy, no, this young man, Tanjiro Kamado, was truly a great demon slayer. He smiled, the adrenaline that had been fueling him quickly dissipating as relief took its place. Not even for his own life, or the boy who saved him, but for the dozens of souls that had been avenged with the destruction of that monster. The last thing he'd ever see before his consciousness faded entirely was Tanjiro, standing above the fading remains of the monster bathed by the moonlight leaking through the trees. The white katana in his hands shining vibrantly as he looked over his shoulder at Satoshi with his crimson eyes. Satoshi would much later wake up in a bed wearing hospital clothes, bandages over his chest and head as well as a cast over his broken leg. He'd learned that he had been found in the edge of the ceremonial grounds unconscious at the dawn of the final selection's first day. Despite having failed the selection on grounds of deserting, he was just relieved to have escaped Mount Fujikasane with his life. Still, he couldn't help but think about Tanjiro, how he'd not only saved him, but almost certainly had carried his weight down the mountain to safety. Despite all his strength and hard composure, he was still very kind deep down. Satoshi wasn't worried that he would be coming down the mountain as soon as the 7 days of selection were over, however. After what he'd seen that guy do, there was no way any demon in that mountain that could bring him down. Luckily, he didn't have to wait for news. For the 5 days that he spent conscious in the improvised infirmary set up by the demon slayers conducting the selection, he'd heard that 8 more people that had come down the mountain. 2 of which had stayed a short period providing Satoshi company in the infirmary while they healed from their own wounds. Both of them had told him the same thing, basically, about the crimson-clad boy with the white blade that had saved them from demons. He never told them his own story, and they had been soon on their way back home once their injuries were treated. Not Satoshi though, he wanted to stay there, talk to him again in person. Soon enough a week would have passed, and Satoshi would wake up an hour before dawn, making his way to the ceremonial grounds aided by a pair of crutches. Things would start out somewhat weird when, just as the first rays of light pierced the horizon, a shirtless swordsman wearing a boar head as a mask would leap out from the forest and land square in the middle of the clearing. Ha ha ha, I am victorious, he cried out triumphantly, number 1 once again, Lord Inosuke reigns supreme. Just as suddenly as he arrived though, the boar man had run off as well without even waiting for the officialization ceremony or the other demon slayers to arrive. Followed hurriedly by a messenger crow on his tail. Soon after he left, people would begin coming down the mountain, first only a few, but by the time the sun had fully began coming up, a full dozen had gathered in the grounds. All talking amidst themselves, though he couldn't see Tanjiro anywhere in there, so many of them passed. Satoshi thought, feeling bad about his failure at the selection for a moment. Only to begin listening more closely to the chatter around him, and from the multiple conversations, he'd gather a thing or two about what he missed. Many were talking about their experiences, and most realized something they all had in common. While during the start of the selection they were being attacked by demons quite often, as time went by the rate in which they attacked seemed to decrease steadily. To the point where by the time the last day rolled around no one could find a single demon roaming the mountain. Satoshi found this odd, as he remembered his father talking about how he himself had dozens upon dozens of weaker demons sent over to Mount Fujisakane over the years. All put there over the course of the year to make sure the mountain would be swarmed for the final selection. It didn't make sense that they were all gone so quickly. That's when Satoshi noticed him, walking out from underneath the trees and past the wooden poles. Tanjiro Kamado arrived the last from all successful takers of the final selection. And comprehension dawned on Satoshi almost immediately once he saw him. His crimson cloak didn't show much difference, which was the exception, since all of Tanjiro's white kimono shirt and, less noticeably, gray hakama, were both covered by several bloodstains. And given how nonchalant he was about it, none of the blood belonged to him either. Compared to the others around him, Tanjiro seemed to have just walked right out of a slaughterhouse. Remembering the first words he had uttered when Satoshi first saw him was what sealed the deal. Tanjiro was not a tall talker. He made bold claims, seemingly impossible claims even, and then he just went and did it. Be it slaying the massive demon that stood before him or going up a mountain and slaughtering every demon he could find for 7 whole days. He'd never been arrogant, but rather he was undoubtedly straightforward with his goals and how he accomplished them. As Tanjiro walked through the group, Satoshi would take a brief look around to see if someone else in there had noticed what he had noticed, and would find two other pairs of eyes amidst the others fixed on the crimson-clad swordsman. The first was a girl with pink-tipped black hair held on by a butterfly ornament, silently gazing at him with hard-to-read yet nonetheless attentive purple eyes. The other was a blond boy with nervous-looking golden eyes that accompanied Tanjiro as he walked through the group. Both were watching him with full awareness of his presence up until he seemed to find a comfortable place on the back of the small crowd. "Congratulations, you all, for passing the final selection," the black-haired child said to them all soon thereafter. "This year we've had a surprising number of takers to pass, plus a lot of others who ended up injured and forced to leave the exam in the process." One boy who stood closer to the two children only snarled, the scars on his face twisting with his expression as he looked at them impatiently. "Whatever, I just want my sword," he huffed. "So just hurry it up." The white-haired child then said, "Of course, but first there is an order to things. We must provide you your messenger crows, as well as take your measurements for your Demon Slayer uniforms and engrave your ranks. There are 10 ranks inside the Demon Slayer Corps outside of the pillars themselves. Those are, from lowest to highest, Mizunoto, Mizuno, Kanoto, Kanu, Tsuchino, Tsuchino, Kinoto and Kino." The black-haired child then explained, "Right now, having just become Demon Slayers, all of you will be the bottom rank of the Mizuoto." "I don't care about all that rank shit," the scarred boy grunted, stepping forward towards the children. "I just wanna get my fucking sword here." Satoshi narrowed his eyes in slight frustration. Were he among the passers of the final selection rather than an injured participant watching off to the side, he'd definitely step up to challenge the angry-looking boy before he started a fight. Unfortunately, he was in no such position. "Hey!" A voice suddenly came from the back of the group, and the scarred boy, alongside everyone else present, turned to look to where Tanjiro was standing. "Maybe you should tone it down a bit. From what I understand, even a Demon Slayer shouldn't be out picking fights with children." "He is right," the black-haired child then said. "Demon Slayers are expressly forbidden from using their techniques against anyone other than demons under the threat of expulsion from the Corps." The scarred boy turned around at the white-haired child angrily. "Don't you tell me what I can't or can fucking do." He reached out to grab them by the hair, only for his arm to be stopped by the firm grip someone else's hand. "I wouldn't do that," Tanjiro advised, standing right next to him now, leaving every single newly minted Demon Slayer watching in shock as he'd moved all the way from behind everyone to right next to the boy before anyone could even notice. Satoshi was the only one that chuckled though, finding some amusement in being the only one there who'd truly known just how out of everyone else's league Tanjiro was. The scarred boy was none the pleased though, as he turned to glare at Tanjiro and probably shout at him to let go, but instead met his gaze. There was a short but intense stare down between the two before the scarred boy pulled his arm free of Tanjiro's grip. Whatever," he said with only a hint of nervousness in his voice as he turned around and walked back to join the others. The black-haired child smiled at Tanjiro. "Thank you for that," they said, "since you are here. Maybe you should be the first one to pick the material your blade will be built from." Both children stepped aside then, revealing a table behind them full to the brim with different sized and colored chunks of Nichiren metal scattered about. "It's a nice offer," he admitted, before turning to look directly at Satoshi, locking eyes with him for a moment, "but I already do have a blade. Still, we insist you pick a metal," the white-haired child told him. "It is part of the ceremony, after all." Tanjiro paused for a moment, but then sighed. "Fine. But I'd rather not stay for the measuring. I don't intend to don Demon Slayer garbs." He then stepped past the two children, and walked over to the table. It took him a moment, as he closed his eyes and apparently tried to sense for the best one, but soon enough Tanjiro had picked out his own chunk of Nichiren. After he was done, each Demon Slayer had a turn to pick out the metal their blade would be forged from, even the grumpy scarred kid. By the time each one had their own metals picked out, the ceremonial grounds would be surrounded by a murder of crows with numerous birds encircling above them. "Now," the black-haired child announced, "you will be receiving your messenger crows." These will be your main means of communication with the core, and they will be the ones to direct you on where to go for your next missions. Please treat them kindly. Soon enough, some of the crows began descending and landing in the demon slayers. Some in their shoulders, some in the head, some in the arm, some just beside them. Satoshi felt a bit of nostalgia as he remembered from his early childhood having a pet crow that had served as his father's former messenger in his demon slayer days. It had died when he was still young, unfortunately, but it was a memory he treasured. Among all other aspects, he was a bit envious he wouldn't be receiving one as well. Satoshi looked around briefly to get an idea of the kinds of birds who were picking the newly minted demon slayers. All had distinguishing characteristics. Some were old crows, some were younger, some had pronounced characteristics. Hell, he even saw one of them with a sparrow on his head rather than a crow. Most impressive of all had to be, of course, Tanjiro. As he extended his arm, rather than a normal crow landing on his arm, one with a white plumage did, a white crow. He thought, fascinated, I didn't even know those existed. Tanjiro though didn't look all that excited about his crow though, as it quickly flew off again and he lowered his arm. Without another word, he'd turn back and start walking off. As he did, the group of people seemed to part in order to let him pass through, everyone present observing him with renewed interest after his demonstration with the scarred boy. Satoshi himself would see this and quickly rise, struggling with his crutches to catch up with Tanjiro before he could just walk off. Hey! Wait, he called Tanjiro out just as he was heading down the mountain, said young man turning to see Satoshi at the top of the stairway, I never got to thank you for. You know. You don't need to, he told the boy, protecting others is what demon slayers should do. I'm just glad I was able to put down that demon before he hurt anyone else. Right, of course, Satoshi nodded, before looking over to Tanjiro's waist, where his father's sword hung sheathed. Listen, about that sword. I don't intend to give it back, if that's what you're going to ask. He said then, I'm sorry, but I can't waste my time waiting for a Nichiren sword to be forged. I've waited far too long already. Your cultivator will understand if you don't bring back their sword, they probably have many others. Actually, that's the thing. That sword is actually my father's. Satoshi then explained, he was a demon slayer before I was born, but he got hurt real bad and had to leave the Corps. He was bedridden most of my life, but when I got attacked by a demon when I was a kid, he was the one to save me, using that very katana. Satoshi narrowed his eyes, looking down morosely. He's gone now, but I was hoping to make him proud by becoming a great demon slayer wielding the same weapon he did. Tanjiro frowned slightly, narrowing his eyes as he stared down at the sword strapped to his waist. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was a family heirloom. Nor that it meant that much to you. He admitted, if you really want it, I can. No, Satoshi said, looking up adamantly then, that sword is the sword of a great demon slayer. Maybe I wasn't worthy of it, but you are. And if you can use it to save just one other person in danger from a demon just like both you and Dad did to me, then I think it belongs to you. Tanjiro widened his eyes, practically the first show of surprise Satoshi had gotten from him so far. I see. He smiled lightly, in that case, I promise I'll put your father's sword to great use. Please do, Satoshi affirmed with a half-hearted smile, that way at least one person will be able to do great things with it. I just wasted all my time training to be a demon slayer. But I couldn't get in. Well, at least Mom will be happy to hear this. Tanjiro raised an eyebrow, so you still have a family. Well, my father is gone, but Mom is still around. She was against me coming here in the first place, Satoshi admitted sheepishly. And she was right, Tanjiro then told him rather bluntly, to which he froze, it was a stupid decision of yours to come here. You're lucky you came out alive. Not you too, Satoshi muttered, suddenly downcast. I know I'm trash at being a demon slayer, no need to rub it in. It's not that, Tanjiro said, climbing up the stairs and placing a hand over Satoshi's shoulder. Look at me, the boy did as requested and looked up at him to meet his gaze again. This time far more closely, demon slaying is a job for those who lost everything else. Most die young, you've seen that for yourself now. Don't be ashamed to go back and live a good life. Satoshi widened his eyes, and for the first time he truly understood Tanjiro. The seriousness about him, those words, the pain in his eyes. He felt as if for the first time he'd gotten an actual peek past his mask, beyond even the rage he'd seen in those eyes back in the forest. For someone to be so strong, so driven, how much had he really gone through? Satoshi felt his eyes water briefly, but quickly tried to hide it, looking away and rubbing them dry. Yeah, okay. He muttered, thanks for that. Tanjiro gave a small smile again, the gravity of the moment fading away quickly. Besides, it's not like all your training was in vain. I bet you can use that to become stronger and protect someone too. Satoshi nodded, biting his lower lip. Right, I will, of course. Tanjiro nodded with his smile, turning away from Satoshi and starting to walk back down when he paused. Oh, I almost forgot. He said then, turning back to the boy, I never got your name. Yeah, you didn't. Satoshi chuckled ruefully, finding the idea that this demon slayer that had impacted him so much in the short time he'd known him didn't even know his name somewhat funny. Satoshi Uteki. That's my name. Tanjiro nodded. Right. It's nice to meet you. I know. Satoshi smiled. Tanjiro Kamado. I heard you at the first day. Given all those bloodstains, I take it you kept your promise. Tanjiro paused then, staring off into the distance for a moment. You know, I didn't just mean here, right? Satoshi blinked, somewhat confused. Sorry, what? When I said I'm going to kill every last demon, I didn't just mean it in this mountain. He looked over at the boy. I meant everywhere. Satoshi paused for a moment at that. It was the tallest claim he'd made so far. And yet, for the first time, there wasn't any sliver of doubt Tanjiro could do as he said. I can't say I doubt you. He admitted earnestly. Tanjiro's lip curved into the hint of a smile then, but he seemed too into his own thoughts to fully acknowledge what Satoshi said. Instead, he only turned around and nodded a silent goodbye to him, before beginning to head down the stairway. Reciprocating the nod, Satoshi only watched as the boy walked down the stairway before walking off, soon disappearing beneath the forest of wisteria. Tanjiro Kamado, Satoshi thought to himself. Watching him go, I am gonna have to remember that name. As fate would have it though, he wouldn't. After all, it wouldn't be long before every single demon slayer was made aware of that name and all it meant. Chapter end. Hope you enjoyed this fanfic. What if, and if ya did, then like, comment, and subscribe for more.